Okay, in this video I want to finish up our overview of the verbs, and just a real quick review to start. We talked about verbs are words that imparts action or state to a clause and therefore a sentence. There's two main groups, the lexical verbs and the grammatical verbs. The lexical verbs are verbs that relate to the real world. We talked about the 5 forms that a given lexical verb can take, and we talked about the, again, depending on how you count them, the 4 or 5 types, transitive, intransitive, copular, or some combination. Okay, and so in this, let's move those up out of the way, because in this last video I want to talk about the grammatical verbs. And the grammatical verbs are a closed class. There are 12 of them. There have been only 12 for quite a while, and there will probably only be 12 for some time into the future. And again, grammatical means that they are there to support the mechanics or the syntax of the language. Okay, the first group I want to discuss are the auxiliary verbs. Okay, we'll put a dotted line under them. And there are 3 of those: do, have, and be. Okay, and in the syntax of the language of English, we use these 3 verbs to form interrogation, fancy word for asking questions, negation, and for showing aspect, whether it's continuous or complete, whether the action is continuous or complete. And we use them for showing voice, particularly the passive voice. Okay? And there are other ways besides using the auxiliaries to show interrogation and negation of a sentence or a clause, but the most common one is to use, the most common ones are to use the auxiliary verbs. And we can show all those different forms. Okay, the other group of grammatical verbs are the modal verbs, and there are 9 of these. Okay, may, might, can, could, will, shall, should, would, and must. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, and there are also what are called semi-modal verbs, but they are lexical verbs. They have all the features of lexical verbs, but they're sometimes used to it's in some ways the same ways as a modal verb. Okay, if we talk about modality, we might discuss some of those semi-modal verbs. But what does a modal verb do? A modal verb gives us the author, the writer, or the speaker, his point of view on the rest of the verb phrase. Okay, in this case we're going to have run. I'm going to use run as our lexical verb, as the rest of our verb phrase. So, what's my point of view? Okay, well, let's put some examples. I can run. Okay, what I'm saying is I'm not so old and decrepit that it is physically impossible for me to run. Okay, so that's a point of view. Let's get that out. I should run. okay, shows desirability. I believe it's desirable. It's good for your heart. It's good for your general health if you do run. Okay, so I should run. Okay, here's one a little more positive and interesting. I will run. Okay, now we talk a lot of languages. Say will is just you're saying what's going to happen in the future. Okay, you're reporting what's going to happen in the future. English, by using modal verbs, is a little more subtle than that. Okay, when you report on what's in the past and the present, you're reporting on facts. It's either happening or it happened. Okay, when you're reporting on the future, you're giving your impression, or the writer or the author is giving his impression on what he thinks is going to happen. Okay, I will run. Okay, I think I'm going to run tomorrow or sometime after that. Okay, do I actually know that? Is that actually a fact? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, a comet could come down and wipe out our town tomorrow. I don't expect that to happen. And then I won't run. Okay, but from where I'm sitting here in front of my computer right now, I'm saying that I will run. Okay, and actually, I don't expect a comet tomorrow, but the weather report, and this is actually true, the weather report is predicting a cold rain for tomorrow, or the possibility of a cold rain. So I may run. Okay, if it's cold and rainy, I won't run. If it's not rainy, I will run. Okay, so I may run. Okay, and again, we use a modal verb to show that. So, one little mechanical thing that we may run into, so I want to mention it. When we start talking about verb phrases, we'll talk about the first word in a verb phrase needs to agree with the subject. So, if that auxiliary verb is the first word in the verb phrase, we're okay, because since these can also be lexical, do, have, and be can also be lexical verbs and can function as lexical verbs. They have all the right forms. So I will use negation. I do not park here. He does not park here. Okay, see, so the do would change to the third person singular form. Okay, now the modal verbs, as it would happen, if you have a modal verb in a verb phrase, it is always the first verb in the verb phrase. So you say, okay, so it needs to agree with the subject, except for one thing. Well, and they do, but the unique thing is that modal verbs never change form. They do not inflect. They do not conjugate. Okay, I may, you may, he may, she may, we may, you may. There's no ing form. There's no ed form, and there's no past or present. Okay, but by convention we consider them tensed. So we just say, oh yeah, if it's a modal verb, it automatically agrees with the subject. Okay, so you don't have to worry about it. Okay, so that actually makes things a little easier. And that's actually true in a lot of languages. Modal verbs are one of the easier grammatical constructs to work with. So, okay. One other thing is that, and this is going to be one of those 99% rules. It's true almost all of the time, but not all the time. So, in general, in the 99% of the time, you do not use a modal verb alone in a clause. Okay, it has to have a lexical verb. somewhere, and it may have auxiliary verbs, but it has to have a lexical verb. Okay, the one exception, and it's kind of rare, is when you're answering a question. So, if you will you be going there? Okay, so will is the first word in the verb phrase. Be going. Be is the auxiliary. Going is the lexical. Okay, so you can say, will you be going there? And you can answer, I will, in which case the will is basically a stand-in for the entire verb phrase. Actually, for the entire predicate. Okay, so, but it has to be in that position where it's the answer to a question. Okay, but if there's no question involved and you see a modal verb all by itself, red flag should go up that you've probably done something wrong. Okay, let's do a quick review of all three. We talked about the verbs impart action or state to a clause and therefore a sentence, since every sentence has to have at least one clause. We have the lexical verbs and the grammatical verbs. Even though there's far more lexical verbs than there are grammatical verbs, the grammatical verbs occur so often that you see them about the same number of times in a piece of writing. The lexical verbs relate to the real world. It's an open class. You can make new ones if you can get enough people to agree on the definition. They come in 5 forms. The base form, which is what you'll find in the dictionary, a present form that modifies more or less with person and number, a past form which may modify with person or number, an ing form, also called the present participle, the ed form, also sometimes called the past participle. You have 4 types. You have transitive, that transfers the action from the subject to an object. You have intransitive, which doesn't, and then you have in various flavors verbs that can be either intransitive or transitive. And then you have the copulars, which give you a state, and they basically help you to provide more information about the subject. They provide a construct that lets you provide more information about the subject. Okay, then you have the grammatical verbs. This is closed. The 12 we have, or the 12 we have. They're grammatical. They're used to support the mechanics, the syntax of the language. Specifically, do, have, and be, support interrogation, negation, aspect, and voice. Then you have the modal verbs, which we use to give the author's point of view about the lexical verb and any auxiliary verbs. Okay, and with that, I think we'll stop here and go make another video.